everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead. Welcome to episode 221, How to Do a Virtual Conference. This is an episode that I've been meaning to do for a long time because about a third of the conferences that I go to are ones that only exist virtually, or just that particular year I'm only going to attend virtually. And going to a virtual conference, as probably many of us know, is not the same experience as going to an in-person conference with all the things that that entails. And at least for me, I know one of the things that I've been trying to do is really think more thoughtfully about how I can do a virtual conference and get something out of it. We all know that a lot of times if you're going to a virtual conference, you're still at home. So that might mean you're trying to attend sessions between teaching classes, or maybe it's noisy in your house because your kids are home and you can't really focus on what's being said. And this sounds kind of bad, but I feel like in a virtual conference, there seems to be more of kind of an impetus to play hooky because nobody knows if you're sitting in the session or not, or I don't know. It's easy for me to kind of walk away from a virtual session and say, all right, I'm going to throw in a load of laundry, or I'm just going to, if I'm on campus, I'm going to duck out, get a cup of coffee, and then the next thing I know, the session is over. And so a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago, I decided to really kind of lean in on how I do virtual conferences, because all of our time and all of the things that we do as scholars, including the scholarly labor of presenting at a virtual conference, going to a virtual conference, all of those things take time. And obviously, one of our missions on this podcast is just to talk about some ways to be very strategic with time for scholarly publication and presentation and all things productivity. So what we're going to do in this episode is I thought it might be interesting to just walk through how I'm planning to do a virtual conference June 6th and 7th. So the conference that I am going to is one of our sponsors, Textbook and Academic Authors Association. So I always say on this podcast how much I love them. They're my only sponsor, but also they're a really helpful example for today about how I'm thinking about a virtual conference, because all of the pieces are there that I need to negotiate. So one of the things about this particular conference is it's in June. So that means I have 2 kids underfoot again. So I may want to think about going to the office for some of that, which I will talk about. Another thing about this is that I'm not only going to the conference to attend it and see sessions, but I'm also presenting at it. And clearly, there's some things that go with presenting online. We've all been there, having to use all the different softwares and things like that. So it just adds an extra layer to any kind of presentation that needs to be done. So what I'm going to show now on screen, and if you're audio only, you don't need to see this to understand what's happening, but I'm just showing the conference program. So one of the things that I started doing about 2 years ago was to just look at conference programs and just decide ahead of time. Actually, this even happened before virtual, but I really do try to look at the program ahead of time at any conference, virtual or otherwise, and decide, what am I going to? What am I not going to? And then in some ways, I do some ranking to just say, okay, these are the 3 things that are the most important for me to go see at a conference. These are things, it's nice if I can get there, but if I can't, it's okay. And then I will make a conscious choice not to go to some things. And so, of course, it's great. TAA is our sponsor. I'd love to say, hey, go to every single session. But I know for me, I could not go to a virtual conference all day long. I could not sit in the seat and do it. I just couldn't. There would be so many things that I'd be trying to grade at the same time. I just know I couldn't do it. And so what I'm doing, and I'm actually doing this kind of live with everybody online, is I just am pulling up the conference program and the agenda. And so what is on screen right now, I'm just going to focus on the 2 days, what a typical conference program looks like when there's a bunch of competing sessions, and then how I'm navigating going, presenting, and managing my real life at home because it's virtual, right? So this particular conference is a 2-day. It's on Friday, June 6th, Saturday, June 7th. Go check it out, Textbook and Academic Authors Association. If you type conference, you'll find it right away. This is a conference all about scholarly writing, which is right up my alley. One other thing I would say about it for anyone else, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably interested in these issues and becoming a better writer or supporting faculty writers. I like this one because it's all about strategy. There's nothing in there about like, oh, we should teach writing this certain way, or these five principles are going to be the answer to all of your scholarly writing problems. My favorite thing about TAA, and this is one of the reasons why I've stuck with them over the years, is that I like that they offer practical strategies, a variety of strategies, because sometimes a strategy won't work at all, or sometimes it will work sometimes, and then it doesn't work anymore, and you have to find something else. So I love the emphasis on practicality. But the other thing is, I like that they have real discussions about issues that scholarly writers struggle with and provide some guidance. So, for example, one of the things that's happening in this particular conference, and one of the things I will be presenting on, is on the revise and resubmit process, because this is challenging for a lot of different reasons, and I'll say something about a little bit more about what I'm going to do in a second here. But topics like that I think are really great. There's a session in this particular conference on titles and abstracts. I love that. I would love to go to a conference where they would talk about that, because we all know that titles and abstracts, especially in our world right now where we're kind of scanning, do I want this? Do I not want this? Those are things that are everything. I'm deciding how to go to these sessions on titles alone. I am not even opening up the abstracts. So this is not to say that I won't open it if I'm like, oh, that looks interesting, I wonder what we're going to do. It's not to say that I won't do that, and you can actually do that in the program that I'm showing online. But I want to be really realistic here and say, as a busy scholar, there's a good chance I'm going to decide to go if I like the title or not, if I think the title will be useful to me. So for this virtual conference, so this is how I'm going to think through this. So this conference is 8:30 a.m. and it goes to 4:45 p.m. on 2 days, on Friday and Saturday. So a couple of considerations there for people that have to manage a weekend where maybe more people are in the house, or you have some other responsibilities. One of the things I would look at is decide, out of a 2-day conference or a 3, I would decide which day is your major conference day. And what I mean by that is, it's likely that when you go to a conference, there's probably one day where there's going to be a lot of stuff on it. That's just the way it seems to happen. It doesn't seem to space out really evenly. So, for example, it's not going to map out neatly like, oh, there are 4 sessions on day 1 I want to go to and 4 sessions on day 2. It's more likely that day 2 will have like 6 things you want to go to, and day 2 will only have 2 or something like that. So one thing I try to do with all of my conferences is to think through what is going to require a lot of engagement for me, what is sort of like a day I need to be high energy, whether this is virtual or it's in person, and adjust accordingly. So a quick look at these 2 days. I like all things scholarly writing. So honestly, if I wanted to, I could probably make this conference kind of even with a little bit of commitment each day. But practically looking at real life and trying to do a virtual conference, it is much easier for me to manage time on Friday and going to a lot of stuff than it is on Saturday. That's not to say I'm not going on Saturday. I am, because my session's on Saturday, but I just might need a little bit more flexibility on that day just because it happens to fall on a weekend. So in this particular conference, when I'm looking at I'm trying to decide like what's happening, what am I supposed to be doing? Just looking at this conference program, there's a couple of different things that are happening. A lot of conferences have an opening keynote or an opening address, or a welcome from the conference chair. This program has those sorts of things on Friday. So I will be very likely to be going to the keynote and just listen, and possibly the welcome too. It's from 8:30 to 10 a.m. So that kind of falls in a good slot for me. I've already dropped a kid off at school. I've already blocked this day on my calendar so I can go to this conference. I'm going to do all that. And then when I look at the rest of the schedule, some of the sessions are concurrent, and we've all been there where you get the big conference program and there's 10 sessions going at one time, or 20, or if it's a really large conference. In this case, there's just 2. So a lot of my decision making will be, does this apply to me or not? So for example, at 10 a.m., there are 2 sessions. One is about refining titles and abstracts. It's called Getting Others to Read Your Work. And then there's another one called the Sustainable Textbook. For me, I'm not going to write a textbook. I mean, I don't see that in my future, or I think people that do that are amazing, but that's not going to be something in my future. And the titles and abstracts, I know I can use that for all kinds of things like conference presentations. I can use it for scholarly articles. So I know I'm going to go to that. Other things that virtual conferences build in that are really, I think, kind of innovative and exciting is usually there's some kind of networking or way to connect virtually and chat during a live time. So between 11 and 11:30 on this program, there's a networking time. And I would say maybe, during COVID, when some of these conferences were just kind of playing with us a little bit, I might have been somebody that said, no, I'm just going to take a longer lunch. I just need to get up and get away from the screen. But, one of the reasons you're going to the conference a lot of times is to do some networking. So I know that I am going to be there for that particular networking session. I'm not saying I'm going to do every single one of them, but I am going to do that one. Just because at the beginning of the conference, there's a lot of energy. One of the things I would say, if you're trying to just make some decisions about, I'm only going to go to one networking thing, when is it going to be? I do kind of like a day one networking event, because let's say you connect with somebody that you really want to talk to, you could keep that conversation going throughout the whole conference. Like maybe there's a way that you're chatting on LinkedIn, or you exchange emails and you're going to talk a little bit. But earlier with networking is sometimes better, because sometimes you'll meet somebody and find out they're presenting later. So this is just a good tip for any conference, virtual or otherwise. I just like to kind of do my networking early if at all possible. Okay, so then if we scroll through here and we look at what else is happening in the morning, there's one about there's a couple of sessions going at 11:30. Both of them look interesting to me. One is about reading strategies and OER, and another one is about collaboration and co-authors. Between those two, they're both of interest to me. I really don't know which one I'm going to go to. And a lot of times with virtual conferences, I will make a game time decision. Sometimes this sounds really bad, but if the conference is in the same like virtual room and I'm already in there and I kind of like what's coming up next for virtual conferences, because sometimes it's a hassle to hop between chat rooms or whatever. Sometimes I will just say, if it's not like a conference software that gives us a separate space, sometimes I'll just stay where I'm at. But of course, all conferences use different softwares. So something on there. This does have a lunch break. I am going to take a lunch break. I know a session that I am going to go to is one at 12:30. It's right after lunch. Lunch is only like a half hour-ish break, I think, if I got this right. And this one, there's a session on navigating the revise and resubmit process. I'm going to go to that one because I am doing a session on Saturday on revise and resubmit. So this is another virtual conference tip. In a live conference, when you go and connect with people in person, sometimes it's easy to kind of hop around and jump from session to session and maybe see like two sessions in the same time slot, and kind of all the crazy running around. In this case, though, I know that I want to go see that one because that's on a topic I am doing on Saturday. And when possible, just with any conference, I do try to think through, okay, if I go to a session that's the day before mine on that same topic, my guess is some people that were in that first session might come to the second session, and it's great to draw some connections. So I know that I will be doing that. All right, so that gets us to 1:30 on Friday, if you're keeping up. I know there is another session at 1:30. By then, I know I will need to stand up, walk around. I will have already been sitting at my desk for approximately 5 hours, not counting lunch. For me, even though that's my bigger conference day, that is too long. So I know for me, I'm going to choose a time to duck out. It probably will be that 1:30 session. I think both of those topics are great. One is about writing with agency and what's the value added stuff in your writing. And the other one is about textbooks. Both of those are great, but I know for me, I'm just going to have to stand up. And, this is one of the things that you cannot go to all the things, and particularly in a virtual conference. I just think for many of us that sit at our desks all day, a whole day of sitting is not as appealing. It's okay to email a conference presenter and say, I could not get to your session, but I'd love to see your slides, or if you have posted anything anywhere, connect with you in that way. So I will possibly do that. And then there's a second networking session that day. So I think if I give myself an hour off and get out, go outside and get away from the screen, I might be ready to jump back in for some networking. But if not, there are two more sessions at the end of the day. I'm kind of interested in everything at the end of the day between all four of them. And so I probably am going to try to go to both sessions. If I'm kind of cashed out by 3:45, I may not go to the very last one. But looking at that conference, that's a pretty full day. Like in a physical scenario, I would have run from different conference rooms. I would have jammed in lunch in 30 minutes. Like, a virtual conference does allow a little bit more resetting time because you don't have to go anywhere other than to return to the space where you are. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about a heavy conference day. The second day is the day that I'm presenting, and I won't talk about all the different sessions that are happening there. But on the second conference day, I want to say something about presenting at a virtual conference. So for me, I am presenting at 10:30. So it's great. It's not the first session of the day. I love that. But I know that I mentioned I want to build on a session that was happening on the first day in the virtual conference. So one thing I will do in that first session on day one that's on revise and resubmitting is just take a couple notes about some things that connect to my presentation. I sometimes at a virtual conference will open with those connections and say, hey, I don't know if anybody was in the session on Friday about revise and resubmit. These were some of the things that were talked about in there. And the reason I'm saying that is to also catch people up that maybe didn't go to that virtual session. So I might do that first and then, make a few connections throughout my own session. So just a couple of strategies with presenting virtually at a virtual conference. I tend to do a couple different things. I like to have my slides in Google Slides and PowerPoint. So I have two ways, and a PDF. I actually make slides three different ways because, I love conference software. Usually it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I like to have things in a couple of different ways that, for example, I've had this at a virtual conference just a year ago. They could not get the screen to share anything. And so all I did was drop a link to my Google Slides in the chat and then just tell people what slide I was on. So everybody could just open it up themselves and follow along, and everything was fine and we all survived. So it was a good way to do that. Another thing I like to do at a virtual conference, because you don't have the ability to pass out a physical handout, I do like to drop handouts or slides or whatever in the chat, just a link to them or potentially an image. I also make sure that at least twice during the conference or in the conference presentation, I drop my email in there. And I'm doing that because I want to make sure that people, as they come and go, if they want to talk to me more, they can come find me to do that. So that will be the morning. My guess is I probably will not go to anything else in the morning as I prepare for that conference. And then after me, I might go to one session at 11 on tenure and promotion planning. Again, there's a lunch break. And then in the afternoon, I think I'm just going to see where my energy is. There are a couple of different sessions. There's one that's a session for everyone called The Art of Interpretation Using Generative AI for Academic Research. I haven't mentioned anything about AI, but that would be something that I would be interested in. And so I think in the afternoon, there's kind of three slots where things are happening. I probably will try to go to 2 out of the 3. If it ends up being 1 out of the 3 based on my energy, that's okay. But there is a closing session that's just a very short session at the end. And I may end up doing that because the one thing with virtual conferences is it's sort of weird. It doesn't have that end of conference energy where you say goodbye to people and do all these things. And so I want to make sure that I, show up at the end if at all possible and try to engage in that way. I also mentioned the AI thing as something that I'm interested in. I will say at this particular conference, it is a focus in 2 different ways. So there's a session on Saturday, but also the keynote itself is on artificial intelligence and the future of textbook publishing. So one of the things about this, even though I'm not going to publish a textbook, I think the discussion is really interesting about that because it affects our teaching materials and other things we might be creating for our classes. So, hopefully this gives you some idea about how to go about taking care of, participating in a virtual conference, presenting at it. Those are just some of the things that I think about. The other thing that I do with virtual conferences is because I know that everybody can see everything because we're on the screen. If I want more detailed graphics or things that maybe would not be the greatest, blown up on a screen where people are sitting, very, very far away from the screen. In this case, everybody's got the screen in their face. So if I want to have a nice, like detailed kind of graphic thing, virtual conferences do offer those affordances usually. So I know that this time around, I might be thinking about maybe some more graphics versus a lot of text on the slides and talking through it that way. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about, and I will put a link to the TAA conference in the show notes, and hopefully I will see everyone there. Happy writing this week.